Hello, my dear masterminds. They really thought they could train someone to match you. That's the part that quietly reveals how little they understood what they were looking at. They believed presence could be manufactured, that depth could be rehearsed, that if they gathered enough discipline, enough repetition, enough focus, they could recreate the way you move through the world. They mistook your coherence for technique. They lined people up in comparison, watched posture, measured output, counted effort, studied consistency. All the visible things, all the things that can be copied, all the things that look impressive on the surface. And for a moment, it almost convinced them. Almost. Until you entered the same space. Not loudly, not theatrically. You didn't announce anything. You didn't correct anyone. You didn't adjust yourself to fit the moment. You simply arrived as you are. Fully set, fully aligned, and the room shifted in a way no training could account for. Because what you carry doesn't come from instruction. It comes from integration. They didn't realize that what sets you apart wasn't skill, but history, not experience in the R-phi-sum-phi sense, but lived pressure. Seasons that asked things of you no mentor could prepare someone for. Choices that had no guide. Moments where you had to decide who you were without applause, without reassurance, without anyone telling you what the right move was. That's where you were shaped. While others were learning how to perform strength, you were learning how to remain yourself under weight. While they practiced confidence, you were being stripped down until only what was true remained. That kind of refinement doesn't show up in drills. It settles into the body. It changes how someone stands, breathes, listens. So when they tried to match you, they didn't feel competition. They felt contrast. They felt how forced their effort was next to your ease, how noisy their striving sounded next to your quiet certainty, how heavy imitation felt next to your natural flow. And that's when confusion turned into recognition. You weren't ahead of them on the same path. You were on a different axis entirely. They trained for outcomes. You grew from identity. They chased improvement. You underwent transformation. They learned what to do. You learned who to be, and that difference is impossible to bridge with effort alone. Some of them sensed it immediately. You could see it in the way their focus faltered, not because they were weak, but because something in them understood the truth faster than their pride could accept it. Their nervous systems recognized a level of coherence they hadn't reached yet. Others tried to push through it, tried to outwork the feeling, to double down on discipline, to convince themselves this was just another challenge. But the harder they pushed, the more obvious it became. They were exhausting themselves trying to imitate something you weren't even trying to project. That's the paradox of alignment. It doesn't strain. You didn't need to prove anything. Your presence already answered questions no one had asked out loud. You didn't correct assumptions, you let them sit with their own reactions. And those reactions told the real story. Because when someone stands next to authenticity, all performance becomes visible. They started watching you more closely, not to learn technique, but to understand origin. Where did this steadiness come from? What shaped this pace? How does someone hold this much calm without withdrawing from the world? They looked for mentors, systems, explanations. They wanted a framework they could reverse engineer, but there wasn't one. There was no linear path, no step-by-step sequence. There was just you, fully formed through nonlinear growth. Your development didn't happen in stages they could chart. It expanded outward. It reorganized you from the inside. Every challenge didn't just add strength. It changed your orientation. You weren't stacking skills. You were shedding illusions. That's why imitation failed. They copied your posture, but not your grounding. They mirrored your calm, but not your regulation. They adopted your pace, but not your clarity. And without clarity, everything feels heavy. You could feel the room adjusting around you. Conversations softened, movements slowed, not because you demanded space, but because coherence naturally recalibrates chaos. Your stillness became a reference point. People unconsciously measured themselves against it. Some stepped back quietly, not in defeat, but in honesty. They recognized a limit they couldn't cross by force. Others stayed, but no longer as competitors, more as witnesses, trying to understand what it feels like when someone moves without internal conflict. They weren't studying how you performed, they were studying how you remained, because remaining yourself is harder than becoming impressive. You didn't rise because you were chasing something. You rose because you refused to betray yourself for comfort. You didn't evolve to win. You evolved to live in alignment with what you knew was true, even when it cost you. That's the part training can't teach. No one taught you how to trust your inner signal when it contradicted expectations. No one coached you through the moments where you had to stand alone in your decision. No one prepared you for the quiet discipline of choosing integrity over approval. You learned that through consequence, through solitude, through reflection. And now, standing where you are, people feel the difference without being able to name it. They sense that you're not motivated by comparison, that you're not fueled by validation, that you're not trying to outrun anyone. You're simply inhabiting yourself. That's why the air felt different when you were there, not tense, dense. Like something had settled into place, like the room realized it was operating on outdated assumptions. They thought growth was about adding more intensity, more effort, more visibility, but you showed them something else entirely. That growth can also be subtraction. Removing noise, releasing false urgency, letting go of borrowed identities. What remained in you was clean, focused, undeniable. They couldn't compete with that because you weren't competing. You were the measure without trying to be. And that's why comparison collapsed in your presence, because you didn't fit inside it. You weren't another version of what already existed. You were proof that another dimension of growth was possible. Some felt inspired, others felt unsettled. Both reactions came from the same place. Recognition that your evolution wasn't an upgrade, it was a reorientation. You didn't climb the ladder they were on. You questioned why the ladder was there in the first place, and in doing so, you stepped into a space they didn't know how to name. That's where you stand now, not above, beyond. And this isn't the end of the story. It's not a reveal. It's not a climax. It's the continuation of something that's been unfolding quietly for a long time. You're still becoming, still refining, still aligning. But now you're doing it from a place that doesn't need comparison to feel real. This is only part one. As that realization settles, something else becomes clear. You didn't just unsettle the room because you were different. You unsettled it because you were complete. Most people are still negotiating with themselves when they walk into a space, one part trying to be confident, another trying to be liked, another trying not to be exposed. That internal friction leaks out in subtle ways. Rushed words, restless movements, overcompensation disguised as certainty. You've learned to recognize it instantly, not with judgment, but with understanding. You were there once too. What changed wasn't that you became fearless, it's that you became honest. Honest about what you know, honest about what you don't, honest about where you stand and what you're willing to move for and what you're not. That honesty removed the internal tug of war most people are still fighting, and when that war ends inside someone, it shows you move slower now, but with purpose. You don't rush to fill silence because silence no longer threatens you. You let moments breathe. You let people reveal themselves without interruption. You don't interrupt energy with explanation. You let it speak. That's why they couldn't keep pace. They mistook effort for depth. They believed intensity was growth. They assumed repetition would eventually lead them where you are. But repetition without integration only builds fatigue. You integrated what you learned. You didn't stack it on top of an unstable foundation. You rebuilt the foundation, and that kind of work is invisible to people who only measure results. They didn't see the internal decisions you made when no one was watching. The times you chose restraint over reaction, reflection over impulse, patience over control. Those choices didn't look impressive in the moment. They didn't earn applause, but they rewired you. So when others tried to accelerate toward you, they skipped the very steps that made you who you are. That's why it never worked. You've noticed something else too. The people who stepped back weren't weak. They were perceptive. Something in them recognized that what you represent isn't something to chase. It's something to grow into over time. If they're willing to face themselves honestly, the ones who stayed longer, who lingered, who watched quietly, weren't necessarily stronger. They were curious. They wanted to understand what it feels like to exist without constant inner negotiation. They were sensing a version of themselves they hadn't met yet, and that sensing made them uncomfortable. Because you don't just highlight potential, you highlight distance. Distance between who someone is and who they could be if they stopped hiding from their own contradictions. That's a hard thing to sit with. You didn't expose anyone, you reflected. And reflection doesn't shout, it waits. You've become very familiar with this dynamic. People project stories onto you because they need a narrative that explains the discomfort you trigger. They say you're intense, or distant, or intimidating, or reserved. Each label reveals more about them than it does about you. Intensity is what calm feels like to chaos. Distance is what boundaries feel like to entitlement. Intimidation is what self-trust feels like to insecurity. You stopped correcting those narratives a long time ago. You realized that explaining yourself only delays someone else's self-awareness. So you let the projections land where they belong, not on you. This is why comparison dissolves around you. You're not playing the same game. You're not trying to win approval, admiration, or position. You're oriented toward coherence, and coherence has a gravity that performance can't compete with. You don't enter rooms asking what you can get. You enter asking what's aligned. That single shift changes everything. You've noticed how people try to imitate your stillness now. They slow their voice. They adjust their posture. They adopt your pacing, but it never holds. Because calm that's performed collapses under pressure. Calm that's embodied expands. Yours expands. It's built on familiarity with discomfort, on knowing you can sit inside uncertainty without needing to escape it, on trusting yourself to respond rather than react. That trust didn't come from confidence training. It came from lived evidence. You've been tested not in dramatic, visible ways, but in quiet moments where you had to choose between short-term relief and long-term integrity, between blending in and staying true. Between proving those moments didn't look heroic. They looked lonely. They looked slow. They looked uncertain from the outside, but each one added weight to your presence. That weight is what people feel, not pressure density. You carry less noise now, less internal chatter, less need to announce your intentions, and because of that, when you do speak, it lands, not because you're louder, but because you're clear. Clarity changes how people listen. You've also stopped mistaking movement for progress. You're comfortable with stillness when it's purposeful. You know that not everything needs to be acted on immediately. Some things need to be understood first. This patience frustrates people who are addicted to momentum. They want visible motion, tangible markers, something they can point to. You've learned that the most meaningful shifts happen before anything visible changes, and that's where you operate now. In that unseen space where decisions are refined before they're expressed, where direction is chosen before action is taken, where alignment precedes movement. That's why when you do move, it looks effortless. Not because it is, but because the work was already done internally. Others try to replicate the outcome without honoring the process. It never lasts. You're not ahead because you're faster. You're ahead because you stopped rushing. You're not stronger because you push harder. You're stronger because you don't push at all unless it's necessary. That discernment sets you apart more than anything else. And as this continues, something interesting happens. People stop trying to compete with you. They start adjusting around you. Conversations shift. Expectations recalibrate. Some people feel inspired, others feel exposed. Either way, the dynamic changes. You become a reference point without trying to be not an authority. And baselines are powerful because they redefine what's normal. You don't need to announce boundaries because your energy enforces them. You don't need to assert confidence because your presence communicates it. You don't need to prove growth because it's visible in how little you're pulled by things that once controlled you. That's the quiet evolution no one can fake. You've outgrown the need to be impressive. You're focused on being accurate. Accurate to yourself. Accurate to the moment. Accurate to what matters and what doesn't. This accuracy brings peace, and peace brings consistency, and consistency builds trust, not just from others, but within yourself. You trust yourself now, to walk away when something isn't aligned, to stay silent when speaking would dilute clarity, to wait when waiting is wiser than acting. That self-trust is what makes imitation impossible, because no one else has your internal reference system. No one else has lived your exact sequence of choices, consequences, reflections, and adjustments. You're not rare because you're extraordinary. You're rare because you're integrated. And integration can't be rushed. As you continue forward, the space around you keeps adjusting. Some people fall away naturally, not from conflict, but from mismatch. Others step closer, not to compete, but to learn how to regulate themselves in your presence. You don't teach them, you don't instruct them, you simply remain yourself. And that does more than any method ever could. This process isn't finished. It's still unfolding. You're still refining how you carry this level of awareness without becoming rigid, how you stay open without becoming porous, how you remain grounded without becoming detached. Those are the next layers. And you're moving into them now, not with urgency, not with pressure, but with the same steady alignment that brought you here in the first place. This isn't the peak. It's the deepening, and this is where it settles. Not in applause, not in comparison, not in the moment where others finally understand you, but in something far quieter, far more stable. You stop measuring yourself against anything outside you. You stop wondering how you're perceived. You stop checking whether you're ahead or behind. Those questions lose relevance when you're no longer orienting your life around them. You realize that nothing was missing, nothing needed to be added. What changed was your relationship with yourself. You trust your internal timing now. You don't rush clarity. You don't force movement. You let decisions rise when they're ready, and when they do, there's no hesitation. Not because the path is easy, but because it's yours. You've learned that presence doesn't compete, it stabilizes. It doesn't try to be impressive. It simply stays consistent. And consistency is what makes people feel the difference, even if they can't explain it. You no longer need to be understood to feel grounded. You no longer need to be matched to feel validated. You've outgrown the need to compare because you've learned to listen inward instead of outward. What others tried to imitate, you lived. What others tried to rehearse, you integrated. What others tried to force, you allowed to unfold. And that's why your path feels quieter. Now, not empty, you move with less friction because you're no longer fighting yourself. You stand with ease because you're not pretending. You rest without guilt because you know rest isn't avoidance. It's calibration. This isn't a finish line. It's a stable rhythm. You continue forward without urgency, without spectacle, without explanation. Not because you've arrived somewhere special, but because you've returned to yourself, to the part of you that doesn't rush to be seen, doesn't bend to be accepted, doesn't perform to feel worthy. You move now with an internal steadiness that doesn't depend on circumstances lining up perfectly. Even when things shift, even when uncertainty appears, your center holds. And that return changes everything. You stop chasing clarity because clarity begins meeting you halfway. You stop forcing direction because direction reveals itself in quiet moments, in small decisions, in the subtle sense of this feels right, that no logic can fully explain but your body immediately recognizes. You trust that signal now, not because it's flawless, but because it's honest. You realize that growth doesn't always look like expansion. Sometimes it looks like simplification, fewer reactions, fewer explanations, fewer people needing access to your inner world. What remains becomes stronger, cleaner, more intentional. There's a calm confidence in knowing you don't have to prove the depth of your work. It's already woven into how you speak, how you listen, how you choose, how you walk away when something no longer aligns. You don't announce boundaries, you live them. And that return is the one thing no one can train, imitate, or replace. Because it wasn't built from instruction. It was shaped by reflection, by patience, by moments where you chose awareness over impulse and truth over comfort. This is the rhythm you carry now. Steady, quiet, unshakable.